They forced the woman to cut her hair. It was a matter of compliance, they said, a matter of safety. In truth, it was a matter of power. On the desolate airbase, conformity was currency, and she arrived with none. The command came down from the colonel himself, a man who saw her long, dark hair as a symbol of civilian disregard for his world of rigid order. He wanted gone. He wanted her diminished, brought in a line like every other piece of equipment on his sand-blasted patch of desert. He did not know what he was asking. He could not comprehend that in ordering the removal of a simple ponytail, he was about to uncover a legend he thought was only a ghost story whispered in classified debriefings. The clippers would hum, the hair would fall, and the world as he knew it would freeze. Dr. Eris Thorne stepped off the transport shuttle into the oppressive heat of Outpost Kestrel. The air was a thick blanket of grit and jet fuel. She carried a single, nondescript duffel bag, its weight familiar in her hand. Her assigned title was Senior Technical Consultant, a vague and sterile designation that immediately marked her as an outsider. The airmen moving with purpose across the tarmac barely gave her a second glance. They saw a woman in simple civilian clothes, her dark hair pulled back in a severe knot, her face impassive. They saw an academic, a bureaucrat sent from some air-conditioned office to meddle in affairs she couldn't possibly understand. Her presence was an inconvenience, another box for the base commander to check. She felt their collective dismissal like a physical pressure, a low, constant hum beneath the roar of the engines. It was a language she understood well. She walked toward the administrative building, her steps even and unhurried, her eyes scanning the layout of the base, the hangars, the control tower, the perimeter fences. Her mind cataloged it all with a detached, automatic precision that had nothing to do with academic theory. For a fleeting second, the scent of the hot dust reminded her of another place, another time, a memory of shimmering air over a different kind of sand, filled with a different, more lethal kind of noise. She pushed it down. Here, she was Dr. Thorne. Nothing more. Colonel Thompson's office was a shrine to his own career. Framed photographs of fighter jets hung on the walls alongside commendations and medals encased in glass. He sat behind a large metal desk, a man whose crisp uniform seemed immune to the dust that coated everything else on the base. He gestured for Eris to sit, though his eyes never left the file open before him. It was her file, thin and frustratingly vague. Dr. Thorne, he began, his voice flat, devoid of welcome. Pentagon Command insists you are a necessary asset for the Spectre integration. I've read your credentials. Impressive. On paper. He closed the file with a sharp snap, the sound echoing in the sterile room. But this isn't a laboratory. This is an active forward operating base. Out here, theory gets people killed. He leaned forward, his gaze finally fixing on her. It was cold and appraising. I don't see what a civilian analyst can offer my pilots and engineers that they don't already know. His dismissal was a tangible force in the room. He was testing her, waiting for a defensive reaction, for the stammering justification of a cornered academic. Eris offered none. She met his stare without blinking, her hands resting calmly in her lap. Her silence seemed to irritate him more than any argument could have. He glanced at her hair. Furthermore, there are standards, regulations. Even for our civilian attachments, his tone sharpened. Your hair is a liability, a safety hazard around active machinery. I want to cut. Regulation length. By tomorrow morning, it was not a request. It was an assertion of his dominance, a simple, petty way to put her in her place from the outset. She would bend to his will, or she would be broken. Eris gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. Understood, Colonel. Her voice was low and even, betraying no emotion. The simple, immediate compliance seemed to catch him off guard. He had expected a fight, a protest. Instead, he got quiet acceptance. For a moment, he felt a flicker of something unsettling in her calm, a depth he hadn't anticipated, before dismissing it as irrelevant. The base barber shop was a small, cramped room that smelled of disinfectant and cheap aftershave. The barber was a young sergeant named Reed, whose swagger suggested he enjoyed his small kingdom of clippers and razors. A few other airmen were waiting, and they smirked as Eris walked in. "Here to join the club, ma'am," Reed drawled, gesturing to the chair. "Gotta lose the ponytail to play with the big toys." Eris said nothing, simply taking a seat and staring at her own reflection in the dusty mirror. She saw a woman with tired eyes and a face that had learned to conceal everything. For a moment, she remembered the feeling of wind whipping that same hair across her face at high altitude, a lifetime ago. Reed draped the cape around her neck, his movements cocky and careless. "Just a trim, or are we going for the full boot camp experience?" he asked, holding the humming clippers aloft like a trophy. "Regulation," she stated, her voice flat. "Whatever that is," he grinned. "You got it." The clippers buzzed to life, and he made the first pass, shearing off the long ponytail in a single, crude motion. It fell to the floor, a dark, lifeless coil on the grimy linoleum. The other men chuckled. Eris's eyes in the mirror did not flicker. She watched as a part of her was unceremoniously discarded. Reed worked his way up the back of her head, clearing away the hair with brisk, indifferent strokes. Then, as he moved the clippers across the nape of her neck, he stopped. The loud hum of the tool was the only sound in the room, suddenly deafening in the abrupt silence. He froze, his hand hovering. The other men's smirks faded as they saw the look on his face. Revealed beneath the shorn hair, stark against the pale skin of her neck, was a tattoo. It was not a colorful piece of art. It was a symbol, precise and geometric, a single, stylized black wing, sleek and deadly, entwined with a solitary, five-pointed star. It was a mark of brutal simplicity and profound meaning. Sergeant Reed, who had seen hundreds of unit tattoos, from the common to the obscure, felt a sudden chill. He had never seen this one, but he had heard the stories, impossible tales told late at night about ghost units that didn't exist on any official roster. Without another word, his entire demeanor changed. His movements became slow, careful, almost reverent. He finished the haircut in absolute silence, the clippers now handled with the delicacy of a surgical instrument. When he was done, Eris stood, paid him, and left without looking back. Reed and the other airmen were left staring, not at her, but at the tattoo that was now visible to the world, and the severed ponytail lying forgotten on the floor. The reason for Eris's presence was housed in Hangar 7, the Spectre drone program. It was the military's newest, most advanced unmanned aerial system, a marvel of stealth technology and artificial intelligence. It was also a complete failure. The system was plagued by integration issues, its complex AI refusing to sync properly with the base's control interfaces. The pilots, accustomed to the tactile feedback of a stick and throttle, hated the opaque, automated system. The technicians, brilliant with engines and hydraulics, were lost in its labyrinthine code. Today was another critical test, a synchronized flight simulation for a wing of 3 drones. Colonel Thompson watched from the elevated command center, his face a mask of tense frustration. Eris stood at the back of the room, silent and unnoticed, her new, severe haircut making her seem even more stark and out of place. For an hour, the simulation proceeded flawlessly. Then, without warning, the telemetry for the lead drone, Spectre 1, began to flicker. On the main tactical display, its icon turned red. A cascade of error messages flooded the screens. The drone had gone rogue. It broke formation, banking sharply and accelerating toward the base's northern perimeter fence at over 500 knots. An automated proximity alarm blared through the control room, a shrill, piercing cry. The room exploded into controlled chaos. "Kill the simulation. Override now," Thompson barked. The lead pilot grabbed his controls, his knuckles white. "No response, sir. I'm locked out. It's not responding to the kill switch." The tech team hammered at their keyboards, their faces illuminated by scrolling lines of red error text. "The system is in a feedback loop. We can't get back in." Panic began to curdle the air. Through it all, Eris remained perfectly still. Her calm was a pocket of absolute silence in the storm of noise and fear. She was no longer watching the frantic efforts of the crew. She was listening to the rhythm of the alarms, the cadence of the panicked voices, the electronic heartbeat of a machine having a seizure. And she understood. While every eye was fixed on the main view screen showing the drone's suicidal trajectory, Eris moved. She didn't run or shout. She walked with deliberate calm to an auxiliary diagnostic terminal in a far corner of the room. It was covered in a thin layer of dust, forgotten and ignored by the primary tech team. A young lieutenant, his face pale with sweat, noticed her movement. "Ma'am, that station isn't fully integrated into the live network," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "You can't control the drone from there." Eris didn't acknowledge him. She wiped the screen clean with the sleeve of her shirt, sat down, and placed her fingers on the keyboard. They didn't type, they flew. It was not the methodical keystroke of an analyst entering data. It was the fluid, impossibly fast movement of a master musician, a flurry of motion that seemed to channel thought directly into the machine. She had bypassed the standard graphical interface entirely, bringing up a raw command line terminal, a black screen with a simple green cursor. Lines of code, dense and complex, began to scroll past at a speed no one could read. She wasn't trying to persuade the system. She was rewriting its reality from the deepest level. The lieutenant stared, mesmerized. On the main screen, Spectre 1 was less than 3 seconds from impact. The base braced for the sound of a multi-million-dollar catastrophe. Then, just as suddenly as it had begun, it was over. The drone's dive instantly ceased. It pulled up in a breathtakingly sharp arc, the maneuver so precise it defied physics. It hovered for a single, silent moment, a hawk brought to heel, before banking smoothly and gliding back into its designated position in the formation. The telemetry on the main screen blinked from red back to green. Complete system stability. The blaring alarms cut out, plunging the control room into a ringing silence. Every person, the pilots, the technicians, Colonel Thompson, slowly turned away from the screen to stare at the woman in the corner. Eris was already closing the command window. Her work was done. She looked up, her gaze meeting the colonel's, and said with quiet finality, "The guidance buffer had a recursive cascade failure. I've patched the colonel. It won't happen again." The stunned silence in the room was finally broken by Colonel Thompson. He strode over to her, his face a mixture of disbelief and dawning suspicion. "How?" he demanded, his voice no longer condescending, but sharp with the shock of a man whose entire worldview had just been upended. "How did you do that?" Eris simply looked at him, her expression unreadable. "Your primary interface has a fatal logic flaw in its exception handling. I accessed the system through the maintenance colonel, the base's lead flight systems engineer, a man with 2 decades of experience, stepped forward, shaking his head. That's impossible. The maintenance kernel is encrypted. It requires a cipher-level clearance. That's a Black Ops protocol. No civilian consultant has that." Eris didn't deign to reply to him. She just held the colonel's gaze, letting the silence answer for her. The moment passed, but the questions had just begun. Later that day, the whispers started. In the mess hall, the young lieutenant who had witnessed her work was recounting the story to his friends, his voice hushed with awe. "She didn't even touch the mouse," he said. "It was all code. Like she was born speaking the language of the machine." Sergeant Reed, the barber, overheard the lieutenant's description of the woman. He walked over to their table, his earlier bravado completely gone. "The consultant?" he asked quietly. "Did you see the back of her neck?" The question hung in the air. At a nearby table, a quiet master sergeant, a career non-commissioned officer who had spent years in special operations support, froze with a fork halfway to his mouth. He had heard the lieutenant's story and Reed's question. He turned slowly, his face suddenly pale. The pieces clicked into place, the impossible skill with the Spectre system, the mention of a locked kernel, the description of a specific tattoo. He leaned over to the hushed group and spoke a single word, a name that was more myth than fact, a call sign from a mission in a forgotten war zone that officially never happened. Nix, the name settled over the table like a shroud, silencing all further conversation. The next day, the desert decided to test them for real. A sandstorm, a monstrous wall of roiling brown dust, swept across the region with a speed and ferocity that defied all forecasts. All manned aircraft were grounded. Visibility was zero. It was in the heart of this storm that the call came in, a six-man reconnaissance team, caught in a narrow box canyon miles outside the perimeter, their communications failing, their vehicle disabled. Worse, thermal sweeps from a satellite pass showed hostile forces closing in on their position. A helicopter evac was suicide. The only asset on the entire base that could potentially navigate the storm was the Spectre drone. But after the near disaster in the simulation, no one wanted to risk it. No one but Colonel Thompson. He found Eris in the deserted simulator room, observing the storm data on a secondary monitor. The arrogance was gone from his posture, replaced by a grim desperation. It was not an order he gave her, but a plea. "Can you fly it?" he asked, his voice raw. "Manually. Can you get a medical and communications package to them?" Eris turned from a screen and gave him one short, sharp nod. "I need full command authority. No overrides from your team. No interference." Thompson didn't hesitate. Done. They led her to the primary control rig, a sophisticated ergonomic chair surrounded by a cocoon of screens with a flight stick, a throttle, and rudder pedals. The pilots who trained on it took 6 months to achieve basic proficiency. Eris strapped herself in with an economy of motion that spoke of deep familiarity. She ignored the standard controls completely. Instead, she retrieved a small, custom keypad from her pocket and plugged it into an auxiliary data port. With a few keystrokes, the main display changed from the pilot-friendly interface to a screen of pure data: wind shear vectors, pressure gradients, and raw telemetry. She launched the drone directly into the blinding maw of the storm. The automated systems immediately began to scream warnings, but she ignored them. She was flying by the numbers, her eyes darting between the data streams and a topographical map. She wasn't fighting the storm. She was using it, letting a vicious crosswind guide her through a narrow canyon past the simulators had flagged as impossible. She was dancing in the heart of the hurricane, and on the screen, a small green icon moved with impossible grace through a field of red warnings, successfully delivering the supply package just meters from the trap team's beacon. She then held the drone in a steady hover, its thermal cameras providing the stranded soldiers a god's-eye view of their enemy, turning their tomb into a fortress. While Eris performed her impossible flight, Colonel Thompson was in his office, his hand gripping a secure satellite phone so tightly his knuckles were white. He was connected to the Pentagon, to a 4-star general in the U.S. Special Operations Command. "General," Thompson's voice was strained, on the verge of shouting. "I need to know who the hell you sent me. This is not a technical consultant. Who is Dr. Eris Thorne?" There was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. When the general finally spoke, his voice was graveled and dangerously low. "Colonel, stand down. The asset you have is not Dr. Eris Thorne. You have a ghost." Her file was flagged for a mandatory administrative review, a bureaucratic formality. Sending her to your outpost was supposed to be a way to keep her off the grid, somewhere quiet until it was cleared. "You will give her anything she asks for." Thompson felt a chill creep down his spine. "Who is she, sir?" The general sighed, a sound heavy with secrets. "Her real name is classified, so far above your pay grade, you can't even see it. We knew her by her call sign, Nyx. She wasn't just an operator, Colonel. She was the lead architect and inaugural test pilot for Project Chimera, the Black Ops program that the Spectre system is based on. She didn't just write the code, she bled for it. That drone is more her child than it is a piece of hardware. She has more flight hours logged in that system's core AI than your top 5 pilots combined. You are lucky to have her." Thompson slowly lowered the phone, the general's words echoing in the silent room. He looked at the tactical display on his wall, where the single drone icon, Nyx, held its position like a guardian angel in the heart of the storm. He remembered his petty, condescending order to cut her hair. A wave of cold, profound shame washed over him, followed by a surge of awe. Back in the control room, the master sergeant who had whispered her name approached the lead tech. "The tattoo," he said, his voice barely audible. "The single black wing and the star. It's the insignia of the Chimera Initiative. We used to call them the Night Wings. I never thought they were real. I thought it was just a story." As the first fingers of dawn began to pierce the receding storm, Eris guided the Spectre drone back to the base. It settled onto its landing pad in the hangar with the silent, weightless grace of a falling feather. The mission was a success. The reconnaissance team was safe. She unstrapped herself from the control rig and stood up. The control room, filled with the same pilots and technicians who had watched her with suspicion just the day before, was now utterly still. The silence was thick with a new, unspoken emotion, reverence. They watched her as if she were something otherworldly. As she walked toward the exit, her short hair starkly revealing the tattoo on her neck, Colonel Thompson moved to intercept her. He stopped directly in her path, blocking her way. For a tense moment, they stood face to face. He did not speak. Instead, he drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight, and rendered a slow, deliberate salute. It was a stunning breach of protocol. A full-bird colonel, a base commander, saluting a civilian. But in the charged atmosphere of the room, everyone understood. He was not saluting Dr. Eris Thorne, the consultant. He was saluting Nix, the legend. Inspired by his action, a ripple went through the room. The young lieutenant, his eyes wide with admiration, snapped to attention. The grizzled master sergeant, who knew the story behind the name, followed suit. Then the pilots, the engineers, the airmen, one by one, every uniformed person in the room came to rigid attention, their eyes fixed on her. It was a silent, spontaneous tribute. Eris stopped. She looked at the colonel, her gaze sweeping across the faces of the others. There was no flicker of triumph in her eyes, no hint of smugness. There was only a quiet, weary acknowledgement. She gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. It was enough. Then she turned and walked out of the control room, leaving behind a silence filled with the weight of a myth made real. That evening, the air was cool and clean, washed clear by the storm. Eris stood alone in the cavernous expanse of Hangar 7, the great doors open to the star-dusted desert sky. She ran a hand along the sleek fuselage of the Spectre drone she had flown. The composite skin was cool to the touch, and the low, steady thrum of its standby power systems was like the slow breathing of a sleeping animal. For her, it was not a machine, it was a partner. The dust stirred up by the day's chaos had settled, and a profound peace filled the space. Colonel Thompson entered the hangar, his footsteps soft on the concrete. He stopped a respectful distance away, his earlier arrogance replaced by a quiet humility. "Your transfer came through," he said, his voice subdued. "The administrative review was cleared. They're reinstating you. A transport is coming for you at 0600 hours. Eris nodded, her gaze remaining on the drone. I want to apologize for my conduct," Thompson said, the words feeling clumsy and inadequate. "Dr. Thorne, or whatever I should call you for the first time," a trace of something soft touched her features in the dim light. She turned to him. "Eris is fine, Colonel," she replied, her voice low. "You were following the rules you knew. It's the only way a place like this can function." He understood then. She held no grudge. She had simply been operating on a plane of existence he couldn't perceive, governed by a different set of rules. She gave the drone one last, gentle pat, a silent farewell to an old friend. She walked past the colonel toward the open hangar door, her small frame silhouetted for a moment against the vast, star-filled night. The last thing Thompson saw clearly was the tattoo at the nape of her neck, the black wing and the solitary star. It was a symbol of a world hidden just beneath the surface, a testament to a quiet strength that needed no words, no fanfare, no explanation to prove its formidable existence. After she was gone, the only sound that remained was the content, electric hum of the machine she had mastered.